My name is Teresa Moulton. I'm the editor-in-chief of the Change Management Review. We're very excited to have three guests join us on a panel discussing today's disruptive work environment and how change management can respond to that. I'm going to take just about 20 seconds and allow other people to join us because they're coming in numbers. So just give me a little bit of time here.
Hey, Teresa, is there a chance that I could get them all on my HQ headquarters site to to do some hands-on
Right, Vernon. How are you doing?
interaction? I'm doing well. Just kidding before we get started.
Oh, so glad you're here. All right. I'm sure there'll be a few people coming in, but let's talk a little bit about how the panel will work. So I'm going to introduce our guests, and then we'll start with a couple of prepared questions that we have. But I know that you all have submitted questions that you also would like to have answered. So our panelists are ready to answer those questions and maybe even bring up the questions themselves. We'd love to have audience participation. So have no, don't hold back in terms of speaking into the microphone. I will ask if there's any questions that have come up. So this is a participant exercise, and the goal is to have a really robust conversation about disrupted work environment and how change management can respond to it. Sound good? Okay. I used to be an aerobics instructor in a previous life, so I'm used to waiting for people to go, yes, that's great, but I understand this is a professional setting. Okay, so let's talk about disruption in today's work environment. As we know, well, I can't say post-pandemic, but during the pandemic, we've had so many different changes going on with the work environment. People, doing the hybrid working partially at home, working partially at the office now. And there's a lot of controversy in many different companies about how to negotiate with employees on, how many days a week do they let them come in, and how many days a week do they let them stay at home. So that's one thing that's coming up. We know that the world is completely going through lots of change with the World Economic Forum and moving into the fourth industrial revolution with technology hitting, and also just in the day-to-day experience of folks that are changing jobs. The Great Resignation has come in and really, well, I guess it didn't come in. It formed itself with over 40% of the folks who are working, trading jobs and leaving their workforce. And people are just out there trying to align with companies who support their value system versus just the work that they do. And the millennials are really out there setting some philanthropic goals around what they really expect organizations to bring to the table, and that's impacting company culture. So with all of that as context, let's start with our first question, and I'll direct this to Megan. Well, wait a second, let me just introduce everybody. Pardon me with my peepers here, but here we go. So we've got David Donaldson. He's the Customer Success Manager of HowSpace. David's areas of expertise are adult learning and development, leadership, and organizational development. HowSpace is a technology company based in Finland. Their platform enables any facilitated process where dialogue matters. I would suggest you check out HowSpace. They have a fantastic newsletter, and I'm getting a lot of great information from them. Our second guest is Megan Newhouse, CEO and co-founder of the Inspirant Group. As Chief People Officer, head of the People Transformation Practice, and Culture Maven, Megan and her teams of unconsultants, that's important to remember around Megan and her team of unconsultants, guide clients from inspiration to transformation. Inspirant Group provides big firm expertise with small firm agility. And when I spoke with Megan just a couple of days ago in preparation for this event, the term unconsultant really landed with me because I think it speaks to how Megan's firm actually works and how they interact with their clients. And it's really, you know, relationship based and straight to the point. So I really just wanted to emphasize that on Megan's behalf. And then we have Andy Zwerin, Agile coach and Scrum Master of SOL Group. Andy's wealth of experience in IT-based project and program management has given him a deep understanding of successfully supporting people through highly disruptive change. In doing so, he calls on his background in coaching and cross-functional leadership. So isn't that interesting to have a Agile Scrum coach who focuses on using his coaching and cross-functional leadership? So there's quite a dynamic there with what he brings to the table as well. So moving forward with the questions, I'll direct this towards Megan. And the question is, as you look at the workplace from pre-COVID through COVID and now into the Great Resignation, what do you see as some of the most critical changes through your own professional lens?
Yeah, thanks, Teresa. Thanks to my fellow panelists. Hello, thank you all for joining. Clearly you're here because you are interested in this conversation. And Teresa, I think you really set the stage well with your intro as we got started. We are absolutely in the midst of a revolution. And to me, that's pretty exciting. I think it can also be scary. Change is hard. You guys all know this, right? We're on a change management panel right now. And, you know, as humans, like our natural state is to want to stay comfortable, is to want to go with what we know, status quo, yay. So this revolution is scary. So, you know, I think we were starting to move that way. And I think there's a lot of factors that influence that. I think, you know, having all of the generations in the workplace right now is a big factor of that. People work differently, people engage differently, and expectations are different. And so, as I said, change is hard. And I don't know about you guys, but as I get older, change is harder. I like to be comfortable more often. So, you know, I think when we're talking about certain generations meeting newer generations, that's where some of this friction could happen. I think that, you know, I've been in the professional environment for 20 plus years now. And even early in my experience, I was looking for more flexible arrangements. I have 2 teenage kids, but when they were first born, I wanted more flexible arrangements and it just wasn't done. So, and that was, like I said, teenage years ago. COVID accelerated that. Absolutely. Like it lit a fire. And I think what COVID did was it allowed people to have time and space to focus on what is really important to them. And so much of that is the time that they spend at work, right? I mean, you think about the time that you spend awake and how much of that awake time is spent actually at work. So people, you know, they can personalize and customize pretty much anything right now. I mean, think about your Starbucks order, for example. Why would they not want their life experience when it relates to the work that they do to be customized and personalized to what they personally need? So all of that to say, this revolution is really disrupting the relationship between the employee and the employer. It used to be, hey, you're lucky to have a job. You know, we can replace you with anything. That's born of the last industrial revolution where people and process were kind of seen as interchangeable. Well, if you can't make that widget, we'll just get that next person because they need a job and they're going to make that widget. But with knowledge workers in the 21st century, that's just not how it goes anymore. So really, to be successful, the companies that are getting it right are creating personalized, individualized experiences for every employee.
Thanks, Megan. And David, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Yes, and very well said, Megan. As you were talking, what was really bouncing and landing for me is when you talked about the acceleration and how, you know, this has really accelerated what was coming down the pike. You know, we're probably 10, 20, 30 years ahead of where we would have been if it hadn't been for the pandemic. And part of that, I think, is around we are dealing with a very different workforce today than we did generations ago. You referred to the Industrial Revolution. We have knowledge workers today. We have people who are far more aware and far more savvy. And through this experience, their tolerance for stuff is less, right? People are not willing to put up with stuff anymore. And leaders have been able to sneak a little bit. And what I mean by sneaking is they weren't quite doing it right, but they were getting away with it because they were still getting the job done. Leaders need to up their game, right? We know what to do. We've known what to do for years, but honestly, it is hard. It's hard work. And we're like, you know what, we'll do 60%. Okay, that's enough. It's getting the job done. Great. That's where I'm going to stop. We now need to go to 80, 90, 95% to get to a base level. So really, for me, what I'm seeing is that COVID has raised a level of awareness in people. It has awoken people that they're no longer tolerant of this. And Megan, your analogy and your example of your kids is bang on, right? People are going, you know what? I'm not going to live to work anymore. I'm going to work to live. And for me, it's about shifting the conversation away from work-life balance and into work-life integration. How do we integrate those two so that they complement each other and work better together?
Great. Thanks, David. Andy, you're muted. Do you have anything that you would like to add?
I do. When David was speaking, the word that came up for me was loyalty. So in the changes in the workplace used to be there was reciprocal loyalty between employer and employee. That sort of started ending as I was starting my corporate career. And in my experience in the Agile and Scrum space, what we encourage is loyalty to your teammates and your first team. I think that's a very powerful shift to make. So that's what came to mind for me.
Thank you. And the next question that builds on that context is, what does this mean for change practitioners? So Megan, why don't we start again with you?
Finding the mute button. You think after 2.5 years, it would be easy for me to do. I know the shortcut at this point. I mean, I think we're all change practitioners. And I mean, please challenge me, folks. Like you are the experts. But for the longest time, when people were talking about change management with me, I'm like, well, I do that. I was an instructional designer by trade, but I helped people navigate changes to process or to technology. And I think, you know, just to echo what David was saying about how leaders need to up the game. Thank you, Charlie. Charlie's preaching that in the quote or in the chat here as well. You know, leaders needing to up their game. It really, it's not for the weak of heart. And I mean, for the longest time, I've thought like not everybody is born to manage people. And if you are going to manage people, you need to have some training and coaching and skill upskilling around that. I don't think it's incredibly natural to be a good leader. You know, you might have heard of this 12-year gap. Often when folks are moving from individual contributor into a management role, there's 12 years before they get real leadership training. And that's when they're then moving into a more executive type role. So once they get into that, you know, C-suite or upper level at an organization, that's when they bring in, you know, the 5 dysfunctions of a team, or, you know, Andy referenced the first team, or they bring in, you know, that executive level coaching. But those middle managers often, stats show, they don't get the proper kind of training or upskilling to actually lead people. So I think that leaders especially need to embrace this idea that we are all, thank you, Charlie, change practitioners. We are all leading change. And how can we best do that? If you are leading a team of people, you need to understand what every single person on that team needs in order to be successful. Just one little story. So my 13-year-old son plays baseball. He's played it for a while. His travel coach is awesome. He had a barbecue on Sunday, kind of like closing the season. And he was talking to me about how he was specifically coaching my son and what he needed. And he said, I have 12 guys on this team and I have to meet every single one of them. Some of them need the tough love. Some of them need the attaboy pat on the back. Some of them need this. And I was like, that's what our leaders need to be doing on their team, right? Knowing what each person needs to adapt and adopt that change. That's how you're going to have success. There is no one size fits all.
Thanks, Megan. Andy, how about you?
So I wrote down a couple of different things. I think for me, the most important thing that we always need to focus on as change practitioners is known by the WIFM acronym, what's in it for me. And when you're the change practitioner, it's about understanding and helping those that need to make the change, what's going to be in it for them. Without that, it's very difficult to make progress on a significant change initiative. The other thing is that I think what we as leaders need to do is empower the people who are closest to the work to make decisions and take action, which brings, for me, there's a book, Turn the Ship Around, by Neil Marcotte. He was a submarine commander. That book is probably the #1 non-technical book that's on every Agile coach's reading list. And it's about how to move from a top-down command and control type power structure into a leader-leader structure. So it's managing by intention. The subordinate says, I intend to do X. And the supervisor, if there's concern, may question something, but most often doesn't say anything and the action gets taken. That it increases engagement significantly, and outcomes are greatly improved.
Great. Thanks, Andy. And David, what are your thoughts on this question?
My first thought is I've got some amazing panelists with me today. The one size fits all, Meg, 100%. And that was exactly what was on my mind when I read that second question. We need to talk with folks, not to them. We need to adjust and give them what they need. And to Andy's point of WIIFM, it was introduced to me as WIIFM radio station. Are you tuned in? And,
oh, cute.
You know, when we listen to our team, that's when we truly understand what's going on. And I remember experiencing one time I was on a project, it was a change project, and the leader dubbed me as a resistor because I was pushing back. Now, I was trying to support the change because I thought it was a really good idea. And he pulls me aside one day and he says to me, just listen. And for 20 minutes, he rattled off all the reasons why. And he was absolutely convinced that by the time he finished explaining why we're doing this and what were the benefits, et cetera, I would be totally on board. And when he finished, I said, you've told me nothing new. I understood and see all of those. Here's where my concerns are. And it was something where completely different. But he didn't take the time to listen to me. And it was an operational issue. And you know, years later, it still hasn't been implemented because they haven't solved the operational problem. Yes, the benefits are there. If they can pull this off, it'll be amazing. 100% behind it. I was the only person in the team who actually field tested it. But at the end of the day, he wasn't willing to listen. And it died in its tracks. So we need to listen to our team. Don't talk to them, talk with them. Listen, embrace the pushback, and work with it.
And David, just to echo that, you know, I found there are a lot of leaders right now who are scared to ask what their team is thinking because they don't want to hear the answer.
100%. Yeah.
You can't stick your head in the sand, right? That's not going to end well.
No, and to Andy's point, and I know, Andy, you're a big fan of servant leadership. I like the term followership myself. So many leaders are scared to let go. And I think COVID has increased that fear because they felt more out of control in the last 2 years than they have probably in their entire careers. You know, as we talk about the difficulty of change, a big part of that is we feel out of control. As humans, we want to be in control. And leaders now are feeling out of control because there's this thing that's coming from outside that's pushing them in places they didn't want to go. So yeah, and that ability to let go and allow the team to move forward and allow the team to take control of it. You're still steering the ship, but they're running it.
So David, we've got a question from Charlie in the chat box, which is, are you saying what do you want or need comes before what's in it for you?
I think those are, Charlie, both one and the same, because what do you want or need is the answer to what's in it for you. What is your position or concern or need? What do you need to make this work? You know, what's in it for you? Now, one of the challenges that we face as leaders is we have a large team, and the larger the team, the more diverse, the more you're going to have competing what's in it for me's. So what might be right for me is not right for Megan. What might be right for Megan may not work for Andy. And this is where it starts to get messy, because how do we get the needs met for each of us while still moving the organization forward to that goal?
Great. And we've got a comment from Ty saying there's a need for a shift from leadership that is directive in nature to a leader as facilitator and enabler.
Absolutely.
I completely agree with that. For me, first of all, with being in information technology, every project is a change initiative, right? So we're going to introduce new software. It's going to change the way people work. So it's something often that gets overlooked, but it's an important aspect of what we do. I would say that control is really an illusion, and their response to wanting more control, the response to feeling out of control is to want more control, is exactly the opposite of what needs to happen. And we're seeing that, right, because people don't want to be micromanaged. They don't want to be told that I have to sit at a desk in a particular location in order for my work to be considered, period. And it's, you know, I've always believed, you know, allow people to work the way they're comfortable working. If they're getting or producing the outcomes that are required, then there is no problem. You know, in IT, we've had distributed teams for a very long time. It's actually not anything new. What was interesting is in the development of Agile and Scrum, there was this big push to have co-located teams, and it was very important. Part of that was the way we tended to work, which was with a whiteboard and sticky notes, where you actually had to be physically in the room to be able to see where things are at. Today, we have lots of tools that enable us to do that with a distributed application or platform. Miro.com, Mural, even Jira, and that is quite enabling. So I think in a lot of ways, our experience over the last 2 decades can be informative for other parts of a company or other types of companies in terms of how to address these issues. I think that we can be intentional and create the same sorts of opportunities for people that are working in a hybrid or remote fashion.
Great.
Hey, and Andy, I'd just like to ask a bit of a clarifying question there, because I agree with you 100%. We have technology tools to enable us to whiteboard around the world simultaneously. How do you deal with the trust issues, though? Because when we come together, when we break bread together, when we sit across the table and look at into each other's eyes a little bit, we develop that trust. It's harder to do virtually. What is your best tip for doing that?
I'm not sure it's a tip. I can describe what I do personally. I share personal stories. Oftentimes they're embarrassing or would be considered embarrassing to myself. And it's really a way to demonstrate vulnerability. And that is the key to building trusting relationships, is to show others that you are willing to be wrong, right? You're going to suggest something and maybe it doesn't land, and that's okay. We can just move on. So I think that's really important, is building that trust.
Great. And Megan, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking the same thing. So Inspirant Group, my company, we founded it in 2017 as a remote first company. We are all recovering consultants. We've done the big 4 here in the States. We're all, as I mentioned before, of a certain age, with many of us with families or interests where we don't want to be, tied to going into an office or traveling all week. So we very intentionally created a remote first culture prior to COVID. So when COVID came, we were like, oh, we got this, yeah, we know, camera on, this is how we work. And so to echo, I think what Andy was saying, we show up very authentically, vulnerably, genuinely. Another way to build trust virtually is to do what you say you're going to do when you say you're going to do it consistently. That's a big one. So, be who you say you are and do what you say you're going to do. We do though, David, with the exception of when we were being safe during the COVID times, which are still here, I realize, but when we were in lockdown, we very intentionally and mindfully gather the team to break bread and to be together because we do genuinely enjoy each other and have fun together in that way. So while we have had virtual events and virtual happy hours, just a side note, I don't get a kickback from this, but Cocktail Courier, if you aren't aware of the company, pretty great. People can pick their own beverage and there are non-alcoholic options. And so we're all able to mix our own drinks and we did a trivia game. That's just one example. We have many culture building activities, which I'm more than happy to talk about at some point. But when we do get together, I always say, what is the best use of everyone's time if we're asking them to commute somewhere, be somewhere, give up their day? It has to be something that we couldn't do virtually. It has to be a really good use of in-person time. So we do that with some regularity, but it's always very well thought out and planned out.
Great.
Thank you.
With those comments in context, I want to open up a different question to the participants. And that question is, given what was said around comparing today's work environment with that of pre-COVID and also the changes in technology, what are some of the change management practices that we need to let go of or modify? And again, this is for the audience. We've got a comment here. You may want to reconsider the scope of WIFM comprehensively for the organizational change actors, the sponsors and agents and advocates and the targets. Great. I feel welcome to just speak into the microphone. We need to stop using placebos and palliatives that don't work. Great. What else?
This is Tricia. Could Edward explain that comment? I'm interested in that.
Eduardo, can you explain the comment?
Yes, certainly. I think that after so long, and we all know, despite of the proliferation of change management practitioners in the world and certifications, the McDonaldization of change management, still many companies or changes are wrongly deployed and unsustainable because of a lack of organization readiness and lack of change governance. And if we keep using the placebos around there that just because a certification is telling you, or using some software, how long do you need to wait to understand that follow the status quo is not the way to go anymore to manage change, and try to find out a couple of things. When change is wrongly implemented, it's either because of two reasons. One is you're missing something critical before change is implemented, or you did something wrong. And usually what you miss very critical is what the runners do before they start a marathon. Before they enter a marathon, they do a fitness test to check how fit they are, because they want to prevent collapsing during the race. And how many change practitioners do really a readiness assessment before engaging change? All of a sudden, you saw the placebos out there who focus on change and do look at the need of the people, look at what exactly you are going to do, but not necessarily whether how fit you are to engage in change. If consultants did that readiness assessment before engaging change, the number of change initiatives wrongly deployed and unsustainable would be very much greatly reduced. Don't do that, and you will keep doing what you are doing until now, not change. That was my point. No offense to change practitioners, of course.
Thanks, Eduardo.
I'm taken.
So we've got Charlie with a comment about the heavy reliance on the push communication. That's one that's really difficult to tackle in terms of traditional change management. What are some options that we can put in place to have more intimate communication with our stakeholders?
I think part of it is to reframe this away from intimate conversations, because an intimate conversation, Teresa, is you and I. That's it, right? It needs to be a two-way conversation, and we need to find ways to enable the larger group to have the conversation in the other direction. Because what happens is when it goes beyond about 10 people, it becomes push out of convenience, because it's like, how do I receive all of this? And to Andy's point earlier, there's tons of technologies now that will help with this. I mean, just thinking about some of the ones that he listed off, HowSpace, what we do, and you know, I joined the company because I really believe in it. It enables us to have that bigger conversation with larger groups. And you're seeing technology similar to HowSpace coming out now that enables conversations truly to happen in two ways across thousands of people, as opposed to just a couple. And this is where we start to get into that. Now, as change practitioners, we can also be intentional. We have lots of tools in our toolkits, things like open space technologies, you know, world cafes. These are all old tools that we've been using for years that enabled us to have those bigger conversations, but it takes a bit of intentionality and it takes a bit of effort. And this is where it's like, you know, we need to put that time and effort in.
Yeah, great. Megan, what do you think? Oh, sorry, Andy.
That's okay. So I just saw liberating structures pop into the chat box. That's a great topic and some good stuff there. But I did want to talk about Jacob's chat comment around evolving virtual approaches to stakeholder engagement. For me, as a Scrum Master, my primary stakeholders are the members of my team. They're not external folks. So I'm team focused. People on the team are focused on external stakeholders. With that said, one of the things that I think accelerated during COVID is the concept of asynchronous meetings. And so I just implemented something along those lines with my team. So in Scrum, we sprint for 2 weeks at a time, and each 2-week period, we're supposed to deliver new functionality that's complete. One of the key Scrum events is called the Sprint Retrospective. So at the end of every sprint, we meet as a team to discuss how the sprint we just completed went, what went well, what didn't go well, all sorts of things like that. And what I realized was oftentimes people approached me individually in conversation to present a problem or an opportunity for improvement. And my response is always, well, let's ask the team. So we get to the end of the sprint, we get into the retrospective, and we sit there staring at each other going, wait, remember we talked about that on that day, and you mentioned that on that day. We spend a lot of time trying to regenerate these ideas. So what I did was I created a Miro board where people can post sticky notes as things are happening in real time. So if I have a conversation with somebody and they suggest something and I recommend we should discuss that at the next retrospective, I now say, please go put a sticky on the board for this. That's an example of an asynchronous meeting. People, we can have a discussion on the board. If somebody posts something and somebody wants to comment on it, they can go ahead and comment. So it's a very important tool for changing the way we engage with the stakeholders.
Great. Thanks, Andy. And Megan?
I mean, what Andy is sharing is, you know, I firmly believe, as I mentioned before, that we are in a revolution. I mean, we have been working the same way, at least in corporate America or corporate, wherever you are, the corporate world, for, I don't know, 50, 60 years. And again, it was starting to change, but the acceleration at which it's changing has a lot to do with COVID, but it also has a lot to do with the development of technologies. Technology is changing rapidly and quickly and advancing. And so I'm new to Agile. So it's only been a couple of years. And I think what many people think of Agile is that it is, Andy's in IT. So that's what IT does. It's an IT thing. But for me, I firmly believe it's the future of work. And I think we're going to look back on working in a waterfall format or, a traditional project management format and really wonder how we ever got anything done. I think that, so many things are changing. And as we kicked it off, change is hard, but to be able to adapt to the change and welcome the change and question and be curious. I mean, though, you all know this as change practitioners, but then helping the people around you to adopt that mindset, because that's really what it is when it comes down to it, isn't it? It's the mindset that you have around the change and helping people. We talked about the ways to get people to see how it personally affects them, but a lot of it has to do with the way it's communicated as well. So meeting people where they are and telling them specifically how they can adapt their mindset to be successful in this new way of working, because as hard as we try, it is not going to go back to before times. And the companies that dig their feet in and, refuse to make these changes are going to feel the pain of that. They're going to lose their talent and something is going to disrupt them.
Great. And I'm noticing in the chat box that Mary Julie is talking about senior leaders needing to become more agile. And before, Vernon was mentioning that there needs to be more executive coaching and helping senior leaders have the dialogue that they need to have in order to lead change in their communication. What's your thought in terms of how change practitioners can actually work with senior executives in a more flexible way to help with the communication and their leadership? David?
The thing that's popping to mind for me is to be a trusted advisor and not a supplier. In a supplier model, someone comes to you and says, give me A, B, and C, right? They're basically picking from the menu and then you kind of hand that over and they're not actively participating with you. To be a trusted advisor, they need to be coming to you and saying, hey, Teresa, how do we go about this? And this is a huge challenge. We need to position ourselves as OD practitioners in terms of we are here to advise and help and support. We're not doing the change. We're not leading it. We are not the change. You are. We're here to help you make that work. And if we think about the skills and the experience that we bring to the table, it's about how to change. They're bringing their experience to the table of how to lead the organization. Absolutely. Let's help them be successful as opposed to them handing it off to us. Because of course, if they hand it off to us, perfect scapegoat scenario. But if we can help them to skill up and now they can actually lead the change. And I mean, it ticks so many boxes.
Yeah, great. Andy, what are your thoughts?
I'm actually going to speak to a couple of things that I've heard that Meg said, and then again, David. So I just wanted to give a little bit of context around the concept of waterfall method or model versus agile. Many people don't realize this, but waterfall, the first time it was in the late 60s, this was written about in an academic paper. It wasn't called waterfall yet at that point. And most people didn't read the entire paper because at the end of the paper, the author said very clearly, and this is no way to do work. Unfortunately, the United States federal government, somebody there read the first part, didn't understand or read the second part, and they adopted it as all contractors producing software must work in this waterfall method. Now, to dig in a little bit, the name waterfall comes from the way it's usually pictured or described, and it is essentially, you have largely 5 phases that you go through. The first phase is gathering requirements, produce a set of documents, hand those documents off to software architect and software designers to design software to meet those requirements. Those design documents and the requirements documents all get handed off to software developers to write the code. That code is then handed off, and here it's the handoff that's a problem, to another team that's going to do QA testing. Then it's going to get handed off to a subset of the user community to do user acceptance testing. And eventually it will go to into production. Now, on any project of reasonable size, that is 12 months, 18 months, 2 years. And so from the beginning to the end, there's not much to show until it's delivered. That's a long time to go without being able to see or touch anything that's coming out of this. And that represents a tremendous amount of risk. What Agile does is limits that risk, or I should say Scrum specifically. It limits that risk by time boxing into these sprints, which could be anywhere from, well, some people have a one-day sprint. Typically it's 2 weeks, can go up to a month. And the idea is that each sprint, they're delivering a product increment that the stakeholders can actually put their hands on and give feedback. And the key is building in these feedback loops. So we talked about the sprint retrospective. That's a feedback loop for the team for its own feedback. The sprint review is the event, also happens on the last day of the sprint, usually before the retrospective, is a demo of sorts to the stakeholders. This is what we're delivering. They can ask questions, they can put hands on keyboard and test drive it and provide feedback. So those are really important things. In my work as an Agile coach, I am facilitating change. I don't want to use the word leading change, although it is sometimes what we do. The big thing that we deal with, though, is this difference between doing Agile and being Agile. And it's a very subtle thing for many people, but it's important. And that is, you can work in ways that appear to be Agile, but you can do it in a way that's very fixed. And the most common question that I get from a person who's just becoming a Scrum Master is, can you give me a roadmap or a template by which I can do this Scrum thing with my team? And right there, it's a fundamental misunderstanding, because if you're providing that, then you're not actually allowing the team to find their own way. So it's important that teams experiment, explore, try things, fail, try different things. And if we're prescriptive, follow this methodology, you're not going to get that input, and they're not going to buy into it. I mean, it's typical change management conundrum.
So Andy, given all of the specificity that you shared around Agile, how does the Agile team engage the sponsors and help them have the right conversations about things like MVP, leading the change? What's the role of the sponsor in an Agile project?
So I'm having a little trouble because sponsor is a waterfall concept in terms of,
how about
at least
executive?
so when I hear sponsor, what I hear is project sponsor.
Okay.
And part of the Agile reframing is moving away from project focus and more to product focus.
Right.
But for the leadership team of an organization, as a Scrum Master, part of your role is to help them understand what Agile is and is not, what Scrum is and is not. And those need to be conversations that happen over some time, because if we tell management we're going to do this Agile transformation and we're going to do Scrum, their first question is, well, what's in it for me? As your executive, what am I getting? And most people incorrectly respond, you're getting things faster, which is actually not the case at all. Oftentimes it's slower. The question is, are we delivering value sooner? And that's a different question. And that's the focus of agility is, are we delivering value to the business? Are we working on the most important things to the business? And it's Scrum is largely about the work that we decide not to do.
Okay, thank you.
And critically built into all of that is the ability to course change midway, because the big downfall of waterfall is that we've set the spec at the beginning and it's not changed until the end after everything's completely done. And that's a recipe for disaster. You've got these constant check-ins along the way, and you can do all these minor course corrections so easily.
So it's the same thing when somebody first explained to me what a prototype was really supposed to be. And they used the analogy of if you're an infantry person and you have a cannon, you set it up, it takes a while to set it, get the trajectory right, you fire it, and then you realize, okay, we missed the target. Now we got to reset it. That's a very cumbersome and long process. In, I think it was World War I, they started in machine guns putting phosphorus rounds so that you could see where the bullets were going and course correct in small increments to hit your target. Similarly, if you ever talk to a pilot, they say, yeah, we never fly directly from any place to any place. It's always a series of course corrections, the same as if you're skipping a boat. It's no direct line between any 2 points in the water.
Great. Thank you. I'm going to switch direction here and start a new question with the time we have left. And that question is, what do you see as emerging best practices in change management? Meg?
Sure. I mean, I'm not sure we have much more than we've already shared here, but just a note on the last topic, I think we had started by like, how do you get senior leaders on board? How do you get executives on board for the change?
Yes.
I'd say for me, my favorite question to ask is, what is the risk if you don't make this change? I would put that in your toolbox, in your arsenal of what to talk about. You know, ideally folks, and it sounds like a lot of folks on this call are consultants. So companies are hiring you to be the trusted advisor for your expert opinion. They might not have the skills or the capacity on their own teams. So you are there to ask the tough questions and to kind of hold up the mirror for them to see where the troubles really are. So that's one of my favorite questions that usually is followed by a very long pause. So put that in your box. What is the risk if you do not make this change? So sorry, and now Teresa, what was the question again?
No, that's fine. That's fine. No problem. I'm glad you jumped in and added that to the conversation. Thank you. So the question is, what do you see as emerging best practices in change management?
Best practices. I mean, I'll always say, and I don't know if this is an emerging best practice, but it really is. I think it's being people first in everything that you do. So organizations are made up of humans. You know, it's a human-centric place. I actually, I have to quote one of my friends had this great LinkedIn post where, you know, just a side note, we're looking to have a panel at South by Southwest. So we're looking to get some votes. So if you join me on LinkedIn, I'm not trying to make a plug, I promise. But Ben Eubanks is, you know, this kind of brilliant mind. And he posted that, you know, basically organizations are made up of people. So I know we as change practitioners have known this for a very long time, but it is this revolution, this change in the way that people work together. And that people approach their career and their job and their work. You know, we talked about loyalty earlier. We talked about trust. We talked about vulnerability. So Ben says that technology can be replicated as a competitive edge. Strategy can be copied from one organization to another, but people are the real differentiator. consider this. Companies don't dream up new ideas. People do. Companies don't build products. People do. Companies don't serve customers. People do. Right? The concept of an organization is a farce. Organizations are made up of people. So the more that we can get that home with the people that we work with at different organizations, changing that mindset, that is the best practice, in my humble opinion.
Great. What else? And participants, feel free to jump in.
So I think the key best practice is investing in creating a truly collaborative culture. And here I'm going to quote Martin Lindstrom, who's the author of Biology and a top business thinker. And he says, the money saved in rent and travel costs doesn't belong to the bottom line. It belongs instead to investments in collaborative culture. Now is the time to reinvent what organizational culture means.
Yes, and I've seen a lot of different articles on culture and change management of late. And as many of you know, some of the older versions of change management methodologies included culture. So it wasn't just stakeholders and process and all that kind of stuff. It included culture, and there was some real work to be done about understanding the culture. So I agree with you, Andy. I think there's a lot about culture coming back, and especially with all the disruptive changes that we're seeing in today's environment. David, you look like you have a comment on that.
I first of all want to agree with Meg and Andy, like absolutely on point. It's got to be people first. The culture's not there. It's not going to work. The one piece I want to add to it, though, is liquefaction. We have just experienced, we're coming out of 2 years of liquefaction. Now, liquefaction is this concept where something that was solid becomes liquid temporarily during an external response. And if you Google it and just look for pictures, you'll actually see cars that have sunk into the ground during an earthquake where the ground temporarily becomes liquid while the earth is shaking, and then it resolidifies. As change practitioners, as leaders, we have an opportunity to shape that liquid before it resolidifies. This is a huge opportunity. And I think that as an emerging best practice, while I agree with Meg and Andy in terms of it has to be people first, it has to be collaborative. Those are things we've been trying to get to for a long time. We now have a bunch of liquid to work with. We have a pliable environment where we can actually direct and shape before things resolidify. So there's a huge opportunity there.
Great. What other practices do we need to modify as change professionals in order to maneuver more effectively in this disruptive business environment?
So I think another important thing is adaptability, right? To encourage people to be more adaptable. And this is also something that is very key in the Agile and Scrum space, because that's what we're doing when we do continuous improvement. We're adapting to what we find as we're doing the work. So another key component is empiricism, is we learn how to do our job better through doing our job.
Okay, great. Anyone from the audience that would like to participate? We've got a couple comments here. Networking that is more informal, just building relationships and actually kind of building that into your approach. And then we have Mary Julie talking about a concept in change management to reinforce that failing to achieve your goals on the first step is not failure, but part of the course, even part of the learning course. So that's great. That makes a lot of sense. And for the panel, are there any other comments, given what we've been talking about, that you think are important messages for organizational change professionals?
I'd like to just build on what Andy just said. We need to
Okay.
throw away our models and methodologies and become more agile, become agile in our approach. We need to look at it almost in that situational leadership lens of who am I dealing with? What does their culture look like? What is the extent of it? What do we need to do this time, which may be different from next time? Yes, we're going to have a number of arrows in our quiver, but the question becomes which ones do we pull out and how many of them? And it needs to be different for each situation.
Great. That makes sense. Megan,
So-
anything?
Oh, sorry.
Sorry. Megan, anything you'd like to comment on there?
Let me just echo what the guys were saying. I just put in the chat, check out the Agile Manifesto. I mean, that's what they're talking about, right? What we value over what it's kind of like the future of work, in my opinion, over what was. So just give that a quick Google and it'll tell you, I think, some of those best practices right there.
Great. And Andy?
So I pasted a link to a book, Competing in the New World of Work, which I think is an excellent read. It's written by Keith Ferrazzi, who wrote Never Eat Alone and 2 other books. His firm, Ferrazzi Greenlight, has been working with these strategies for hybrid and remote work environments beginning before COVID. And they absolutely understood the opportunity that COVID presented to them to use the world of work as a laboratory. So they established a research arm in order to do some academic research. They engaged with corporate leaders, and the book is a collection of their learnings.
Excellent. Well, listen, I'd like to thank our panelists and all of our audience members for coming together and having this important conversation around the disrupted work environment and some of the issues and actions that we can take as change professionals to really address it. So thank you very much for your time. We are recording this, so this will be available if you'd like to revisit it. And I believe that our chat is downloadable. So I'll leave this up for a minute or two in case you would like to download the chat. But thank you very much. And I should also I want to acknowledge Brian Gorman. He has been completely involved in designing this event and very helpful in working with Megan and Andy and David so that this event, became a success. So thank you again, and we hope you'll come to our next Change Management Review event. Thank you.